Namaskar.
Namaskar. So, very happy evening to all of you. This presentation is very important topic on congenital heart disease, and it is congenital cyanotic heart disease, and the speaker is none other than Professor Vijay Lakshmi. So she doesn't need any introduction, but as a protocol, we have to do some formal things, and I'm obliged, I'm really happy. She is mentor, she is teacher to many of us to introduce her in a formal way to all of you. She's the first lady cardiologist and the first one to start pediatric cardiology in Karnataka. That is in the Sri Jayadeva Institute of Cardiovascular Sciences. She has done lots of work in congenital heart disease, in structural heart disease, in rheumatic heart disease, written lots of books, written many publications, many awards, and few of them from her are her pioneer work in acute rheumatic fever, that is, and she defined the Vijaya Echo criteria for the rheumatic heart disease. She delivered 27 prestigious oration, which is a huge thing to happen. She authored a book step by step to echo in congenital heart disease and edited 3 textbooks: acute rheumatic fever, comprehensive approach to congenital heart disease, and cardiac arrhythmia. So all aspects she has covered in her books. She has received 56 prestigious awards by Bharat Abdul Kalam ji, former President Srimati Pratibha Patil, from Chief Ministers, Best Paper Award, Gold Medal. So everything is there in her kitty. So, ma'am, it is over to you to cover this a very important topic for our colleagues about the congenital cyanotic heart disease in an adult patient, because it's in itself is a unique field. In pediatric, in newborn, we are struggling with these babies, but adult itself poses a totally different aspect of the cyanotic heart disease. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Monish, a good friend, and for your kind words. And I would like to thank Dr. Parashar, the father of echocardiography in India, for giving me an opportunity to speak on cyanotic heart disease approach in the adult patient. And here it is so important that for newborn babies only we struggle, but in adult it is much more. One of the most wondrous features of animate nature is surely the most perfect harmony existing between structure and function. That's what John Hunter said. The best example of this principle is the heart and the circulation. They have the perfect harmony, exactly the same between the right and the left. But the clinical expression of the congenital structural defect altering the function and the shunt in the circulation leads to the cyanotic congenital heart disease. Way back 2 or 3 decades ago, when Joseph Parlat came to Hyderabad, that was a national conference of Cardiological Society of India, and he took up bedside clinics for 1,000 odd cardiologists. And so perfect was the analysis that he made clinically that at the end of the day, when he made the diagnosis, that was better than the echo diagnosis given by the cardiologist in Hyderabad. And I was so impressed. I ran after him like a child because I used to carry his clinical recognition of congenital heart disease book as a gospel with me. And that was my book I held in front of him. And with the trembling hand, he gave the autograph to me. And after 3 decades, when he wrote the foreword for my book, Comprehensive Approach to Congenital Heart Disease, I was so overwhelmed. And what he says, the diagnosis of cyanotic congenital heart disease represents the epitome of applied clinical logic when correct inferences are drawn from accurate observations, diagnoses are made with the gratifying frequency. And how true it is. Once we go systematically the clinical examination and analyze the case and then look into the echocardiography, we make a perfect diagnosis. So friends, the technology of echocardiography has grown by leaps and bounds and has become an essential part of the diagnosis of surgical, non-surgical management of any congenital heart disease, especially tetralogy of Fallot, which we see very often in the adult, and the grown-up congenital heart disease, what we call as a Gooch, and the post-surgical repair, because many children undergo surgery and they come back to us with as grown-up children. And here is a position of the heart in the inverted way. Most of the pediatric cardiologists, we would like to see the echo in the inverted, and the adults see in a regular way. So one should be able to see both in the regular as well as the inverted. So I'm going to show both of them so that you get a good idea. So this is the levocardia, where the LV is forming the apex. When there is a situs solitus with the levocardia, that is perfectly normal heart. But when there is a situs inversus with levocardia, invariably it will be associated with lots of complex congenital cyanotic heart diseases. Then we come to the dextrocardia. Here, if the dextrocardia is associated with the situs solitus, it is called as isolated dextrocardia. In the isolated dextrocardia, the RV forms the apex, but here you can see that the RV, that is the trabeculated RV, is on the left side, and the smooth-walled LV is on that side. So that is a mirror image dextrocardia. This happens whenever there is a situs inversus. So situs inversus with dextrocardia is a mirror image dextrocardia, and the apex is formed by the left ventricle. And in a mesocardia, situs ambiguous is there, and here we don't know what is the one, and it becomes very difficult for the echocardiographer. Now coming to the cyanotic congenital heart disease, it is defined as an anatomical congenital cardiovascular birth defect. That means it is from the intrauterine life and it is there at birth. We may diagnose it much later, but still it is a congenital heart disease. We may see when the person is 30 years, 40 years, but still it is congenital. So here the right to left shunt is the hallmark. That means there has to be right to left shunt. Mixing of the desaturated blood with the saturated blood is a must to cause the cyanosis. So the cyanotic congenital heart diseases contribute to about 1/4 of the total congenital heart disease, and they can be classified into 3 groups. One is with the reduced pulmonary blood flow, where the QPQS is less than 1. And these are the ones who become very cyanotic. They come with the spell, or they become very serious with convulsions at a younger age. And then other one, we have increased pulmonary flow. These are the children, they are cyanotic, but they develop pulmonary hypertension, develop Eisenmengers, and so they come again early. But this third group, the near normal blood flow is the one. Though they are cyanotic, they are leading normal life, and then they come much later. So we have to concentrate on this third group where the blood flow is normal. So the child growth is normal, and then the child grows up as a Gooch and then comes to us much later. Now, further we can classify into eight of the conditions. One, the commonest is the tetralogy of Fallot. If any adult cyanotic patient you get, if you make the diagnosis as tetralogy, 90% of the time you are right. That's how my teacher taught me when I was a student 40 years ago, and it is still true. And you may have tetralogy like physiology. Anatomically, it is not tetralogy, but physiology is like a tetralogy. The second group is double outlet right ventricle, what we call as a DORV, with the VST-PS. And then we may have transposition with the large VST and also with the PS. So mixing is there, but still the lungs are protected. Then we have a corrected transposition of great arteries with VST-PS, tricuspid atresia with VST-PS, single ventricle with the pulmonary stenosis, truncus arteriosus with the small pulmonary arteries or stenosis at the origin, or you can have a severe pulmonary stenosis with the right to left shunt at the intra-atrial septum, either in a form of AST or the patent foramen oval. And then last but not the least, we have Epstein's anomaly, which is quite common, and adult cyanotic, that is one of the things next to tetralogy we have to think of. So let us go with the clinical scenario of each condition. Out of this 8, we'll clear all the 8. So this is a 25 years old male patient, came with the cyanotic congenital heart disease diagnosed in the past. Cyanosis was there, saturation was 78%, clubbing present, no parasternal heave, silent precordium, single second sound, ejection systolic murmur in the left sternal border. So this is a classical picture. The silent precordium with the oligemic lung field is the hallmark of the tetralogy of Fallot. That's what Madam Helen Taussig gave the axim. And then what are the possibilities? The first possibility is tetralogy, as I told. You can also have tetralogy like physiology, that is possible. But what is not possible in this patient is, it is not Eisenmenger's, because in Eisenmenger's, however severe is the pulmonary hypertension, the split will persist in AST, and then P2 will be palpable, and P2 will be very loud, and parasternal heave will be there, and the past history of repeated respiratory infection will be there. It is not Epstein's anomaly, because palpitation is a must, because they have WPW syndrome, and the waxing and waning of the cyanosis is very common in Epstein's anomaly. So this is unlikely to be done. The other one is TAPVC, or the total anomalous pulmonary venous connection. And this is also unlikely, because it will have the split first sound, split second sound, and then there will be a parasternal heave, because the whole volume is coming into the RV. So with this, when we did the echo for this patient, the echo with the Doppler study showed large mal-aligned non-restrictive VST. You can see that this is a large mal-aligned non-restrictive VST. And apart from that, you can see that there is a bidirectional shunt. When you put the color Doppler, you have the bidirectional, because both RV and the LV are pumping into the overriding aorta simultaneously. And that's how you have the bidirectional shunt. And then there is the RVOT obstruction that we see in the short axis, and the large aorta, which is overriding. Overriding means 50% from RV, 50% from the LV. And this is called as the overriding. And because of these 4 features, it is called as the tetralogy of Fallot. The Fallot was the one who described. But actually, some people, the cardiac pathologists, they describe it as a monology, because all these 4 features that we see in the echo are because of one single abnormality, that is the capillary insertion of the interventricular septum causes a large non-restrictive VST, overriding, and because of the capillary insertion, there is a RVOT obstruction, that is the infundibulous stenosis, and because of that, there is a RV hypertrophy, consequence to single problem in the interventricular septal insertion. And that's why it is also called as monology. But however, we all of us are very commonly using the tetralogy, and that should be taken. Now, I told you in the short axis, we can see the turbulence in the RVOT, and then there is also turbulence in the pulmonary artery. So in the short axis, infundibular pulmonary valvular stenosis, and the size of the pulmonary arteries and its branches all can be seen. And apart from that, the coronaries also can be seen in the short axis. And here in this picture, you can see that there is a dilated coronary sinus. When there is a dilated coronary sinus, we suspect that LSVC, that is the left superior vena cava, is draining into the coronary sinus. So this has to be told to the surgeon, because they have to do the separate cannulation. And if there is an associated AST PFO, also has to be told to the surgeon. So any adult echocardiographer, not only you see all these 4 features, you must also look for the LSVC and coronary arteries, and also AST. When there is an associated AST, we call it as the pentology of Fallot. So that means the 5th component is there. Now, this is another patient where 40 years old male presented with worsening of exertional dyspnea, blurring of vision, headache. And these symptoms were not new. They were present from the childhood, but he neglected. It was not very severe. And on examination, there was a mild clubbing, cyanosis was present, and saturation was 88. That means not severely desaturated that we see in children where we have 60, 64, 70. And here the second sound was muffled. So we were hearing only A2. And if you look at the echo, you can see that the overriding is not 50%. It is less than 50%. So when the overriding is less than 50%, it is not a tetralogy anatomically, but then it is a tetralogy like physiology. The reason is in the short axis, you can see that it's the tricuspid aortic valve, and then this is the right coronary, left coronary, and you see the pulmonary valve which is thickened, and there is a pulmonary stenosis. So this is the VST-PS acting like a tetralogy, but in reality, this is not a tetralogy. And this is a 20 years old man, known case of cyanotic congenital heart disease. He refused surgery because he felt he can manage his life. And now he came with the easy fatigability, swelling of the lower limbs. A known case of cyanotic congenital heart disease coming with the swelling of the lower limbs is very, very unlikely because congestive cardiac failure does not occur in tetralogy of Fallot. If a tetralogy of Fallot, which was diagnosed in the past, the patient has come with the congestive cardiac failure where the JVP is raised, the liver is palpable, bilateral pitting edema is there. These are exceptional cases, and you must look for the presence of aortic regurgitation. Aortic regurgitation is common among the adult tetralogies. So you must look for the AR. Then you must see whether there is a restrictive VST. As long as there is a non-restrictive VST, both the ventricles are pumping into aorta. The moment there is restriction to the VST, the RV pressure becomes suprasystemic, JVP raises, liver is palpable, patient goes into failure. And apart from that, the other conditions, you must look for the bacterial endocarditis. Though bacterial endocarditis is rare in tetralogy, I have seen children with the bacterial endocarditis, and that can cause the failure. And then associated anemia has to be seen. Now, you look at this 20 years old patient, you can literally see that almost like a closing in VST, it has become like a restrictive VST. And as a result, what happens is there is a suprasystemic RV pressure. And you can also see that there is an aortic regurgitation, and one of the cusp is prolapsing. And because of that, there is an AR. So there is an AR, restrictive VST, and both are ending up with the what we call it as the congestive cardiac failure in this patient. So this is an extremely rare one, but everyone should keep this in the mind. Now, coronary anomalies are found in 4 to 12% of the patients, and in children, we can nicely trace the coronary even right up to the middle portion. We can see the branches also. But when it comes to adult, you can see here that coronaries are very difficult to trace because the echo window itself is bad in adult, and then tracing the coronaries becomes all the more difficult, and especially if it is going across or cutting across the infundibular portion is also very difficult to make out. And in such patients, one should not rely upon the echocardiography alone. They must send the patient for the CT angio. And here in the CT angio, you can see that the right coronary artery is arising from the left coronary sinus, and then it is descending across the RVOT. This is the RVOT. It is descending across that to reach the AV groove. So this is a dangerous one, and that gives like an alarm bell to the surgeon. And this is the most common one is the right coronary artery arising from the left coronary. And apart from that, then the surface reconstruction can also see even the branches also can go. And the left anterior descending artery can also arise from the right coronary and go across the RVOT and anteriorly can reach the groove. So whether it is the right coronary or the LAD going across the RVOT, it is a dangerous situation. So what is the importance of knowing the coronary artery, especially in the adult tetralogy, is that presence of major coronary located in the infundibular region makes the treatment of the right ventricular outflow tract obstruction complex one, because infundibulectomy is done through the RVotomy by cutting the RV. While cutting the RV, if they cut the major coronary artery, whether it's the right or the left, then it can be catastrophic. And in order to do the infundibulectomy through the pulmonary arteries are small, annulus is also narrow, so this becomes very complex. So awareness of coronary anomaly helps in deciding the time and the type of the operative method. So angiographic CT angio is very, very helpful. Now, gone are the days when I worked with Richard Vanpra, and so many videos I went on seeing, almost like, I was addicted to his beautiful pictures of all the complex congenitals. And the absent pulmonary valve or atresia of pulmonary artery are also the other extreme of the tetralogy of Fallot. So how do you make out? Clinically, it looks like tetralogy. Then when you see the X-ray, you can see that instead of the empty pulmonary bay, it is full. Something is aneurysmally dilated, and you are surprised. The oligemia is there, RVH is there, but why is the pulmonary artery so big? And this happens because of the absent pulmonary valve. So in this patient, clinically, there is a to and fro murmur. So this we see in children, whenever there is a cyanotic child comes with the to and fro murmur. To murmur is because of the pulmonary stenosis caused by the narrow annulus. Fro murmur is the pulmonary regurgitation because the pulmonary valves are absent. So this is a classical picture of the absent pulmonary valve. So when there is this is in a child, but this is exactly how you look for the absent pulmonary valve. You can see that the RVOT is aneurysmally dilated because of the free pulmonary regurgitation, and the pulmonary arteries are also huge. This is most unlike the tetralogy where RVOT is narrow because of the infundibular stenosis, and then there is the pulmonary arteries are small. So in absent pulmonary valve, it is just the opposite. And when you put the CW, you can see that this is the to murmur causing the pulmonary stenosis, and that is the pulmonary regurgitation. So both the color Doppler as well as the continuous wave Doppler, they show you the pulmonary regurgitation and the pulmonary stenosis caused by the annulus. So this is a 30 years old patient, surgically corrected tetralogy, but has come with the to and fro murmur. So once the tetralogy is corrected, the cyanosis should come down and the murmur also goes off once the infundibulectomy is done, unless there is a residual RVOT obstruction. But here there is a to and fro murmur. Once you hear a to and fro murmur, think of the PS-PR. In the acyanotic, aortic stenosis, aortic regurgitation, and the VST with the aortic regurgitation. Those are the acyanotic conditions. But in cyanotic, you must consider the pulmonary stenosis with pulmonary regurgitation. And here you can see that there is a free pulmonary regurgitation and the pulmonary stenosis. And this is the pulmonary stenosis, then that is the pulmonary regurgitation. And this is how you have to look for. So whenever you have a to and fro murmur, this is another post-operative 20 years old patient, repaired tetralogy, though the clubbing is there, cyanosis is not there as the saturation is 96. But when you do the before doing the echo, when I felt the pulse, it was collapsing. Once there is a collapsing pulse, wide pulse pressure, 130 by 40, it indicates that there is an aortic regurgitation. Now, why the aortic regurgitation in a case of tetralogy? Either because of the inadequate repair or damage to the aortic valve during the repair. So here you can, very interestingly, you see that the interventricular septum looks very, very abnormal. So this is the dynamic obstruction of the normal interventricular septum, and this is the dynamic movement, and this is the adynamic. So the patch that is given, Dacron patch, is adynamic, and that doesn't contract like the rest of the interventricular septum. And that's why you have got this abnormal movement of the interventricular septum. And what you notice, here you can see that during the diastole, you are seeing a jet in the LV, and during the systole, you are seeing another jet in the RV. So that means there is a residual VST with the aortic regurgitation. So this is the tetralogy repaired with the damage to the aortic valve causing the AR and the residual VST. So here, this is the 18-year-old boy, repaired tetralogy of Fallot, systolic murmur heard in the whole of the right hemithorax. Actually, we assess the children before they go for the surgery whether there is a peripheral pulmonary artery stenosis. Nearly 25% of them, they can have peripheral pulmonary artery stenosis. But what happens is, if it is a mild, we leave it. But post-operatively, the stenosis can progress. And here you can see that if you hear a murmur in the whole of the hemithorax, it indicates there is a peripheral pulmonary artery stenosis. If it is heard in the whole of the right hemithorax, it is the right pulmonary artery. If it is heard in the left hemithorax, it is the left pulmonary artery stenosis. Now, with this background, when you look at the echo, you can see that the laminar flow is in aorta, turbulence is in the RPA. So right pulmonary artery stenosis is present in this. And when we do the 4D echo, we can literally see inside of the pulmonary arteries. This is the main pulmonary artery, and you can see that how long it is. And this is the post-operative one, and this requires stenting. And that's how it is almost like getting into the what is like a pathological specimen. You can literally see how the right pulmonary artery is diffusely stenosed, and you can see that how tight it is. And from here, we move on to the other end of the tetralogy, that is the pulmonary atresia. So the tetralogy physiology, repaired one, and now we come to the pulmonary atresia, where the pulmonary artery is totally atretic. And when the pulmonary artery is totally atretic, the problem for the echocardiographer is much more. The tight pulmonary stenosis also may look at like atretic, but you have to put the Doppler signal to see whether there is flow across the pulmonary artery. Many a times what was thought as pulmonary atresia, I could do the balloon dilatation because there is a flow. So here you have to look for the valve, and all these conditions, they can have the confluent pulmonary arteries or non-confluent pulmonary arteries. Now, this patient, 16-year-old child, how did the child came? They came with the brain abscess, and then the patient was referred to me for the fitness for the brain abscess drainage because there was cyanosis. And look at here, the patient has got pulmonary atresia. There is a pulmonary valve is atretic, but the right pulmonary artery, left pulmonary arteries are confluent. Now, how is the child surviving? And when you go higher in the arch, it is not the ductal view. You go in the suprasternal thing, and here you can see that there is a vertical duct supply. So this is the arch, these are the cephalic vessels, and this is the vertical duct directly coming from the top to the pulmonary artery, as if, you know, the nature has made a BT shunt or like a pot shunt to the patient. And this is how, when there is a vertical shunt, and this patient had a continuous murmur. So whenever you hear a continuous murmur in a suspected case of tetralogy of Fallot, either it is due to collaterals or due to the vertical duct or due to the BT shunt which has been done. So when we look at it, this is from Dr. Srinivas from Mumbai, and plenty of collaterals are seen, and the plenty of collaterals are not adequate for us to make the decision, because these collaterals, whether they are to make the unifocalization, we have to decide how they are. So this is the 32 years old lady, married 3 months, and continuous murmur is there, and the plenty of collaterals are there. This is another 16 years old child, had undergone palliative surgery, probably BT shunt, and there was a continuous murmur in the atypical region. When there is a continuous murmur in the atypical region, because this was a modified shunt on the right side, the scar is on the right side, there is no sternotomy scar, and then you have the functioning BT shunt. So if there is a functioning BT shunt and the murmur is there, and we are able to see on echo, why has the patient cyanosis increased? Why the fatigue has increased? Because this BT shunt will be only 4 millimeter. When the child grows and becomes adult, so they will overgrow this BT shunt and they come back. So initially they feel free that they're all right and they don't come to you, but then ultimately they have to come. So remember, if there is a continuous murmur in the pulmonary area, think of the vertical duct, just not the ductal view. Go to the suprasternal view and look for the vertical duct, and go to the short axis and look for the plenty of collaterals, or you come to the right side and look for the functioning BT shunt. So if there are murmur is on the right side, then it is a functioning BT shunt. Now nowadays, whether it is a modified shunt or not, whenever there is a problem, we do the CT angio, and here you can see that the BT shunt is functioning, the RPA and LPA are stenosed at the origin. And this is important, and this cannot be made out on the echo. And even if we diagnose that there is a peripheral pulmonary artery stenosis, we cannot make out the extent and how much is the problem. And hence the 3D echo is done in this. When the reconstruction of the 3D echo superimposed with the pulmonary segment are done, you can see that the MAPCAs are in the yellow. These are all the aortopulmonary collaterals, and the blue ones are the native pulmonary artery going there. So for the unifocalization, this is extremely important to make out. And this is the patient of Dr. Suresh Kumar from Kerala, 28 years old lady, operated, and she had a long systolic murmur, and echo showed a residual VST. This is an inverted image that the most of the pediatricians do. When you invert it, it is very much like the anatomy, real anatomy, and the surgeons are used to this. So when you do this, you can see that this is the left ventricle and this is the right ventricle, and that is the residual VST. So in the parasternal long axis, you can see a VST, and that is the patch there. And then this is the residual VST. And you have to look at the gradient. If it is a small residual VST, we can close it with the device, and that's how you have to tell. So this is the 36 years old patient, came with the effort dyspnea, episode of syncope in the preceding month, and there was on examination and the ECG showed a wide QRS complex tachycardia, almost like a flutter, and it was misinterpreted as VT because post-surgically when the RBotomy is done, there is an RBBB, right bundle branch block. On top of that, when the tachycardia occurs, it appears like a VT, so many echocardiographers may miss it. So remember, whenever you are doing echo, don't keep it empty like this. Connect to the ECG and do the echo. Unless the ECG gated or connected echo is done, we will not be missing. So here you can see that this is the patch of closing, and the aorta is into that, and there is a minimal aortic regurgitation. So this patient, what they had done was, because of the free pulmonary regurgitation, and the RV dimension was 42 millimeters with the severe RV dysfunction, surgical pulmonary valve replacement was done. Now, the transcatheter pulmonary valve replacement is also possible, and this is also one of the patients of Dr. Suresh Kumar. And The RV dysfunction post-operatively or pre-operatively are very important. Here, how do you take the measurements? First, you take at the annulus, and then in the mid portion from the annulus to the apex, you make the measurements. Not only the RV measurement, you have to take the RA volume also. The right atrium will be dilated when there is a tricuspid regurgitation. So that also has to be measured whenever you are looking at the RV dysfunction. The other way of looking at the RV dysfunction is RV is dilated, hypertrophied, and then ejection contractions are reduced. And what is more important is the D sign. Normally, interventricular septum is a part of the left ventricle. So in the ellipsoid heart, the septum acts as a part of the left ventricle. But when there is a RV dysfunction, RV dilatation, either due to the pulmonary hypertension or the pulmonary stenosis, either way, when the RV pressure is high, the interventricular septum is pushed towards the left ventricle, and that becomes flat and looking like a D sign. And this gives an indication to the echocardiographer, look, there is RV dysfunction. Visually also, you think that there is RV dysfunction. And then on echo also, measurement also you have. And then the other better method is the tricuspid annular plane systolic excursion, which is called as the TAPSE. And this TAPSE has to be done with the tricuspid annular plane calculating the measurement. So this is how the diastolic, end diastolic, and end systolic, you measure the TAPSE, and that gives a picture. But now I'm blessed to have a very good 4D echo from the GE, and here you just click and you can get the whole RV function. And here the ejection fraction is 41%, because the RV is a triangular one and it has got the three components, the inlet, the apical, and the RVOT. So all the three components becomes difficult for an echocardiographer, but the 4D can give you an exact ejection fraction and how much it is and what is the function. And now we move on to another case or the post-surgical. So this is the 16 years old operative case of tetralogy of Fallot, operated elsewhere 1 year ago, and presented to me with the history of fatigue, generalized edema, and I was surprised. Why should the edema occur? So I told you edema can occur when there is a congestive cardiac failure, and I told you restrictive, the VST or bacterial endocarditis or anemia, but this patient didn't have that. So he had a collapsing pulse, and at the same time, the oxygen saturation was 94, and the palpable tender hepatomegaly was there, pitting edema was there, and I was wondering what it is. So just with the aortic regurgitation, you just don't get a florid congestive cardiac failure. And then when I did the echocardiography in this patient, and in a parasternal long axis view, I had a surprise of my life, because I had never seen anything like this. And here you can see that this is the patch of the surgeon's repair, but the aorta is not brought back into the LV. So part of the aorta is in still RV, and it is still overriding, and the aortic regurgitation, portion of it is coming into the LV, most of it is going into the RV. So we know the aortic regurgitation is a regurgitation insufficiency of the aortic valve into the LV, but here it is into the RV. On one side, they have done the infundibulectomy, and on top of that, there is a regurgitation into the RV, and it's a huge thing, and that's how the patient had come with the severe congestive cardiac failure. So the patient was operated, and look at the bad luck of the boy. 1 month after, he came with the fever and again breathlessness, and this time he was anemic. And when we did the echo, look at that. The vegetation is there on the patch where they had closed it, and then also in the RVOT. So these multiple vegetations had made his life miserable. Now the AR is gone, but huge vegetations have come. So congestive cardiac failure persists because of anemia, bacterial endocarditis, and hemolytic anemia. So that's how we must be very, very careful, keep our mind open, eyes open, and look into the echo completely and decide what is the problem. Because echo is the one which is like, your histopathologically final diagnosis has to be given to the clinician. So this is another operated patient of tetralogy. And remember, 20 to 30 years of survival is almost 90%. And when I was working with my mentor, Dr. Savitri Srivatsav, one of the tetralogy operated child had become doctor, and he used to come for the checkup to Madam Savitri Srivatsav. So that heartening it is. So once the repair is done, whenever they come for the echo, you must look whether there is a tricuspid regurgitation, whether there is arrhythmia, whether there is a pulmonary regurgitation, whether there is any sort of ventricular or atrial tachycardias are there. Because whenever there is a tricuspid regurgitation, the RA gets dilated, atrial flutter or fibrillation are common. And whenever the pulmonary regurgitation is very severe, and on top of the RBBB, they can have this. So the ECG has to be done. And in this patient, the patient had undergone the previous repair, and pregnancy was complicated with more maternal complication is seen. And whenever a lady comes, you have to counsel her depending on whole of the picture, rather than saying, no, your operation is done, it is successful, go ahead. You cannot tell that. So look for the residual collaterals. If the residual collaterals are there, they have to be coiled. If there is elevated RV OT thing, that should be looked for. The left ventricular enlargement, LV dysfunction has to be seen, and the fetal outcome also is very important, because they can have a child with the tetralogy. So the fetal echo has to be done. So this is the 32 years old lady, tetralogy of Fallot, pulmonary atresia with the VST, with plenty of major aortopulmonary collaterals. And post multi-stage surgical repair was done. And in this patient, she wanted to know whether she can conceive, and RV dysfunction was there. And apart from that, I know the both RV and the LV dysfunction were there, and some residual collaterals were there. So in this patient, when you do, though the repair is done, though she is otherwise all right, she wants to conceive, you must say no to the patient. So as an adult echocardiographer, you should be able to assess as a whole. The reason is, this patient, when the echo was done, ECG was done, this is how it was there. So ventriculotomy scar causes RBBB, and when the tachycardia occurs, it becomes like a monomorphic VT. So in presence of monomorphic VT, you never know, the VT can deteriorate into ventricular fibrillation, and the sudden death can occur. And hence, the echocardiographer should be able to give the whole detail. And apart from that, you must give the annulus, pulmonary annulus. This is not the tetralogy, and I'm just showing it to how the measurement has to be done. The pulmonary annulus has to be measured. The main pulmonary artery should be measured. The RPA and LPA at the origin should be measured for the ratio, and the descending aorta at the diaphragm should also be measured to know the ratio. Now, this is the 23 years old woman. She had been a known case of poisoning, and 2 years, at the age of 2 years, she was diagnosed. And as a child, she was forced to limit her exercise. So she was not playing, and she restricted her activities, and she was faintly cyanotic at that time. And at the age of 9 years, she had another illness and diagnosed as a rheumatic heart disease. So in our country, what happens is, whenever there is a fever or the murmur, they make it as rheumatic fever. Remember, already somebody has made it as a congenital heart disease. Now making it as a rheumatic, the combination can be there, but still you have to be very careful. And ultimately, when I did the echo, it was the DORV with the VST-PS. Now, in case of DORV, the double outlet RV, in that the aortic overriding is more than 70%, or the whole aorta may be arising from the RV. There are 16 types of DORV, but the one where the VST is committed to the aorta, they grow up to the older age and they come as an adult. Now we move on to the other condition, that is the corrected transposition of great arteries. So here there is a ventricular inversion. That means the morphological left ventricle comes to the right ventricle, morphological right ventricle comes to the left side. So since there is a ventricular inversion, there is a double discordance. There is a AV discordance as well as the VA discordance. The ventricular arterial discordance also is there. Atrial ventricular discordance is there. So because of the double discordance, physiologically it is corrected, but anatomically it is not corrected. So here the pulmonary veins are draining into the LA, but this is connected to the tricuspid valve because you can see that it is more towards the apex. This is the mitral valve, then tricuspid valve is more there. And this is the morphological RV with the moderator band. And the highly trabeculated one with the moderator band, since it is pumping into the aorta, there is a hypertrophy. This is the right atrium, mitral valve pumping into the LV. So this is a complete heart blocks are very common. And these are the patients, they come with the tachyarrhythmia or bradyarrhythmia in the same day because they have an accessory AV node. They can have tachyarrhythmia or bradyarrhythmia. 10% of them, they have the bradycardia, and hence you have to do the ECG. And this is the patient, when we did the echo, you can see that this is the trabeculated RV with the moderator band. It is hypertrophied because it is pumping into the aorta. And you can see that tricuspid valve is attached much lower down. And that is the VST. So with the color Doppler, it's a VST. So this was the 20 weeks pregnant lady, 24 years old lady, came with the exertional dyslip and told about the palpitation. Diagnosed to have CTGV. Now she has a VST-PS, but did not undergo surgery as she was not worried about the palpitation, or she was not restricted her activity, and now she is asking for the counseling. Now you have to be very careful here because if, when there is a VST and there is a pulmonary stenosis, the saturation and the RV, whether it is functioning well or dysfunction, has to be calculated because the RV dysfunction can become worse during the delivery. Now, this is a 24 years old male, bluish discoloration, fingers, lips, and easy fatigability for past 2 years. Heart rate is 100, BP is 120 by 80, cyanosis clubbing present, parasternal heave is present, ejection systolic murmur is there in the pulmonary area. And then, what is it? Looks like a tetralogy physiology. And then this again turned out to be CTGV with the large VST with the bidirectional shunt in the ostium secundum EST and the pulmonary stenosis. But in a CTGV, you have to look carefully at the tricuspid valve and the mitral valve. Sometimes the left-sided valve, which is actually a tricuspid valve, can have Epstein's anomaly also. So whenever there is an Epstein's anomaly, correction becomes very difficult. And in such patients, allowing them to go for the pregnancy is very difficult. Now, what is the effect of cyanosis? They can lose the fetus, they can have problem during the delivery. This is one of our Swamiji's brother, very VIP patient, already diagnosed as atrial septal defect, sinus venosus type, and the cardiologist there had told this is inoperable because he had mild cyanosis and clubbing. So it was concluded that the AST has caused the pulmonary hypertension. Eisenmenger's AST is almost impossible to operate on. And with that, when I was requested to screen and look at that, this is the sinus venosus type of SVC type of AST, right? Clinically, P2 was not loud, it was not palpable, and parasternal heave was not that prominent. Parasternal pulsations were there, but not the heave. So clinically, I felt it is not a pulmonary hypertension. So when I did the echo, you can literally see that SVC is straddling over the AST. When the superior vena cava is straddling over the AST, part of the cyanotic blood is coming into the left atrium, part of it is coming into most of it into the right atrium. So the cyanosis and clubbing was because of the rerouting of the SVC blood into the LA because of the overriding or the straddling of the SVC. And this has to be kept in mind in adult patients. Don't jump to the conclusion it is a pulmonary hypertension, Eisenmenger's, because there is a cyanosis and clubbing. So rely upon your clinical acumen and then correlate your clinical findings with the echo. And this, you can see that the coronary sinus is dilated and there is an unroofing of the coronary sinus. So this is another condition, extremely rare type of AST, where unroofing can cause the cyanosis. So now we move on to the AST, to the conditions where the AST is present, but something else is the cause for cyanosis. And that is, here it appears like as if it is the ostium primum AST. Remember, just because RA-RV are dilated and there appears like a ostium primum AST, don't jump to the conclusion it is ostium primum AST. Look carefully, the left atrium is small, the pulmonary veins are not draining into LA, and where are they draining? So when we look carefully, this is the intracardiac TAPVC. Intracardiac TAPVC means all the pulmonary veins from the confluence, they enter into the coronary sinus, and these are the ones, they act like AST and they come as the adult congenitals with the cyanosis. So this is the commonest one where the intracardiac repair TAPVC is there. So this is the 53 years old cyanotic woman. The echo with the color Doppler showed the ostium secundum AST. And don't be happy with the just ostium secundum AST. This was my daughter's classmate's mother. And then, you know, they had missed the TAPVC. There was a confluence chamber, confluence behind the LA. And this was a TAPVC. And so here the RV inflow view, only when we did the RV inflow view, we could see the TAPVC. Now, how do you make out? You have to look carefully for the coronary sinus as well as the how the flow is there, the pulmonary veins, and where they are draining. Now, this is the 18 years old boy presented with a history of repeated respiratory infection. So that means there is a large left-right shunt. Breathlessness, palpitation, cyanosis, no past history of spells or spotting. So on one side, there is an increased blood flow in the history of repeated respiratory infection. And on examination, there is a parasternal heave, wide split second sound is there, P2 is loud, and soft ejection systolic murmur is present. And there is a soft continuous murmur. Now the whole thing appears like a TAPVC, but there is a soft, blowing, continuous murmur. So this boy who was asymptomatic all along, why has he become now? Now, what is called as the hemodynamic voice has to be kept in mind. Here, what happens is the vertical vein, it passes in between the left bronchus and the left pulmonary artery. As the years pass, the left pulmonary artery becomes bigger and bigger, and it compresses the vertical vein, and that is called as the hemodynamic voice. That means like voice, it is caught between the left pulmonary artery and the left pulmonary bronchus. And here, when you put the CW, you can see the continuous wave Doppler, and then there is a turbulence in that portion. So though the figure of 8 is there, and you can see that this is the vertical vein and that is the horizontal vein, and that is the SVC, and you can see here that this is the confluence, this is the left atrium, and then here you can see that there is an obstruction to the vertical vein. So whenever in what you think as a TAPVC, if there is a atypical continuous murmur, think of the hemodynamic wise and look for the obstruction in the vertical vein. This is an unoperated tricuspid atresia in a 20 years old lady. She came with the cyanosis since birth, wishing to become pregnant. See, many people think that the moment they are married, they have to be pregnant. So once upon a time, my teacher used to teach for the rheumatic heart disease. If you have a rheumatic heart disease, don't get married. If you get married, don't become pregnant. If you become pregnant, don't continue the pregnancy. But then the things all changed because of the treatment that we have. But however, whenever an adult patient comes asking for counseling, the adult echocardiographer should look carefully. Here you can see that there is a tricuspid atresia, hypoplastic right ventricle is there, there is a VST, and what is important, ejection fraction appears as 54 when you calculate, and what is important is the pericardial effusion is there. You don't get a pericardial effusion without the congestive cardiac failure. So this is the inverted image. What the pediatric cardiologists do, the surgeons want it. There is a large AST, totally right to left shunt, and then you can see that the LV dysfunction is there, and then there is a VST. This is the hypoplastic right ventricle, and this is the tricuspid atresia. Once the pericardial effusion is there, you should not allow the pregnancy. So here the saturation was 47%, pulmonary valve gradient was 80, ejection fraction was 54, pericardial effusion present, patient is in congestive cardiac failure. All women with pre-existing cardiac condition should be counseled before, they should have an echo before they conceive, and we have to advise them properly. Now we move on to the other common condition, that is the Epstein's anomaly. This is the 44 years old man presented with the intermittent cyanosis, palpitation intermittently, sweating, weakness, giddiness. Pulse was 100 per minute, 120 by 80, BP was normal, and then JVP was raised, A wave was prominent, and quadruple rhythm is present. The T1 is very loud. The loud T1 is very, very important, and that is called as the sail sound. Loud M1 is there in the mitral stenosis. Loud T1 is present in the Epstein's anomaly. And the T1 occurs before the S1. And as a result, this is called as the sail sound. And there was a superficial, scratchy, harsh systolic murmur. It is almost like resembling the pericardial rub. Now, most of the younger generation, they have not heard the pericardial rub. That is the to and fro cadence will be there, both heard in the systole and the diastole, like a chugging of the murmur. And this is the classical picture of Epstein's anomaly. And when you look at the X-ray in this patient, it's a typical money bag appearance or the box in the thing. And so the narrow pedicle with the money bag appearance, how do you distinguish from the pericardial effusion is the cardiophrenic angle is obtuse in pericardial effusion, and here the cardiophrenic angle is acute. So this is the Epstein's anomaly clinically and X-ray wise, and ECG is done, and you can see that the tall P wave is there, taller than the R wave, and Madam Helen Tossing called it as a Himalayan P wave because it's so huge. And you can see that the whole atrialized RV and the RA together, there is a huge one, and the short PR interval with the delta wave, that is the WPW syndrome. And when you do the echo, look at the beautiful picture of the anterior tricuspid leaflet. The ATL is moving like a whip. how the whip is moved, it goes up and down, and in the same way you can see that is the anterior tricuspid leaflet, whip-like movement, and the septal leaflet is adherent to the septum. We have to measure from the annulus to the here till where it is the adherent to the septum, and that is very important to decide whether it is a Epstein's or not. And this is the classical picture of the Epstein's anomaly. And here you can see that apart from the Epstein's anomaly, this patient of mine had a divided right atrium. So the RV was so small, huge atrialized RA, and then the RA, and in between the atrialized RA and the actual RA, there is a membrane. So divided right atrium, or the quadriatrium dexter was there. And this is the picture that we get in the MRI. So we move on to the importance of the MRI in this patient. This patient was diagnosed to have the double chambered RV and the pulmonary stenosis, and I wanted to know whether the pulmonary dilatation should be done or not, whether there is a VST or not. And I could not get on the CT also. When I did the 4D, you can see that the non-compaction of the LV is there, and the septum is intact, and the double chambered right ventricle is there. So I did the balloon dilatation, and child made a good improvement, and started feeling better. So this is the 28 years old lady, 16-week gestation, presented with the history of exertional breathlessness. Most of the time, breathlessness in a pregnant lady, we think it is due to anemia or the gravid uterus. But here, when the echo was done, you can see that there is a large VST. Don't be happy with finding of one finding, because like how the birds of the same feather flock together, the many congenital anomalies can flock in one person. And here, when I move to the other view and you just modify, you can see that there is a double chambered RV. So this is the RV, this is the apical chamber, this is the infundibular chamber, and there is a turbulence here and the severe gradient across that. So this lady has got a large VST with a double chambered RV, and on top of that, you can see a membrane here, that is the divided right atrium. So when two obstructions are there and one shunt lesion is there, the continuing the pregnancy becomes very difficult. So this patient had a non-compaction, LV dysfunction, and then pump failure, risk of thromboembolism is there, arrhythmia is there, RVOT obstruction is there in the form of double chambered RV, and hence she cannot continue her pregnancy. One should be very clear about that. So moving on to the last one, that is the triology of Fallot. Here you can see that this is a 30 years old patient who came with the history of 8 months amenorrhea, and you can see that the severe tricuspid regurgitation is there, giant right atrium is there, and emergency balloon valvuloplasty I did to save the fetus as well as the mother. And the single ventricle, though rare, I have seen a 45 years old patient with a single ventricle, and I have done the echo. And this is oldest reported in the literature is 74 years old man with the double inlet single ventricle. This happens when the great arteries are normally related, and that is called as a Holmes heart. And at that time, if the pulmonary flow is normal and normal flow is there from the ventricle into the aorta, and this patient can continue and survive. So hence, don't think that single ventricle is in children, and here in this patient, along with single ventricle, there is a supramitral ring also present. So in the post-operative patient, getting the picture is very difficult. So this was the TGA where the bidirectional glen was there, and you can see the glen very nicely in the echo. So post-operatively, the whole thing is distorted, and getting the good picture is very difficult. And especially in conditions like truncus or TGA, it becomes very difficult. Then we take the help of the CT and MRI. And here you can see that this is the truncus, extremely rare. Last but not the least, bidirectional shunt has to be kept in mind, or right to left shunt. This is the 36-year-old lady presented with the exertional breathlessness and the pulmonary arteries. I mean, the pulse was collapsing. BP was 136/60, and there was a differential cyanosis. And the differential cyanosis more in the lower limb than the upper limb. One has to think of the PDA PH. And this may be associated with the PDA with the interruption of aorta. So here you can see that the cyanosis in the lower limb is much more than in the upper limb. And this happens whenever there is a right to left shunt in the PDA associated with either coarctation of aorta or interruption of aorta. So you have to go for the suprasternal and also look for the thing. And clinical examination is very important to look for the BP in the upper limb and the lower limb. And the reversed differential cyanosis occurs in tossing wing anomaly. Many of the cyanotic patients, they put the nail polish and come. And so it becomes very difficult to make out whether they are cyanotic or not. But look at the conjunctiva and also the tongue. In the adult, look for the RVOT residual obstruction, tricuspid regurgitation, then arrhythmias. Now we have the speckling to know the right to left or the left to right shunts. This is my last video and the most important one. Can anyone tell what you see here? Sorry. There is a gross RA-RV dilatation, and normally when there is a pericardial effusion, we see the RA collapsing. But here there is the LV, left ventricle is collapsing. Extremely rare condition where there is a severe pulmonary hypertension, Eisenmengerization, and the preload is reduced because of the peripheral pulmonary arteries are all pruning is done and then no blood is flowing and the preload is reduced. And no child as of today should go into this condition. Unfortunately, the most beautiful woman, Madhubala, we lost because she had a large VST and she went into Eisenmenger's and then she had hemoptysis, and that should not happen as of today because any child can be operated in time and made better. So friends, to conclude, echo windows in the grown-up congenital heart disease are not very good. So it becomes very difficult. Children, we have different challenges, and adults, we have different challenges. And especially post-operative, where the surgeon would have handled it, the whole anatomy would have changed, and the regular echo windows will not show properly. So we have to spend more time. The complications tend to occur in the third or the fourth decade, and so you have to assess on echo both LV as well as the RV dysfunction. And most of the survival in the adulthood, they survive up to 15 to 25 years much later. So common modes of death is sudden death can occur in them because of arrhythmia, then pregnancy on top of the cyanotic heart disease, all are complicated. But friends, you remember one thing, what Herophilus said, the best physician is the one who is able to distinguish between possible and impossible. All the conditions that I showed are possible to treat. Impossible is once they go into Eisenmenger's. So remember, try to make the diagnosis in time. And here, whatever the 2D echo, 3D echo, 4D echo, CT, MRI, ultimately the solid foundation is the clinical acumen. Always do the echo in the background of the clinical examination, and then you are unlikely to get into a problem or miss the diagnosis. So friends, what the mind does not know, the eyes will not see. If clinically you do not have what you have to look for it, your eyes will miss the diagnosis. And what the eyes do not see, the mind cannot comprehend. If you do not do the echo and find the defects in the echocardiography, you will not be able to come to the conclusion. So question marks will remain and you will send for the CT and the patient will go for the window shopping. So friends, finally, uh, these are the two great living legends with him. And I thank Dr. Parashar and the whole group of IAE. And one thing I would like to tell, when I was a student, many of my classmates used to think mathematics is difficult, but I used to find it as very nice because once your steps are right, the result will be right. So you can score completely. When I came to medical college, many people thought central nervous system is very difficult, but I found it very nice because you go systematically, you make a perfect diagnosis, and that's how I could get. Despite getting the CNS as the long case, I stood first to the university. But remember, ultimately, the echo is so beautiful. You can analyze your clinical finding, correlate them, and come to the conclusion. And that's how you can be a better echocardiographer and better clinician. I wish all the best to all the viewers and the Indian Academy of Echocardiography. And thank Munish also for sharing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. It's a wonderful session, actually, wonderful presentation. You have covered everything: clinical, how to image the things, pre-op, post-op, rare and common scenarios, everything. Like when I was reading the AHA guidelines about the adult congenital heart disease, they talk about post-op talk, post-op, yeah, and everything. They don't talk about pre-op talk in adult or POP TGA or TAPVC or as means for them it actually sort of does not exist. But for us, it's not a surprise. It's very common to see us. And unfortunately, we are still seeing Eisenmangers not diagnosed early. So suddenly a patient coming at 40, 50 year of age with truncus arteriosus, and you are finding, or a large AP window. ASD, VSD is obviously there. So it's a huge scenario. We are seeing totally different picture of congenital heart disease.
Munish, I would like to tell here one thing. When I was working in Mayo Clinic, I saw Puga, a Mexican cardiac surgeon, operating on a 3-day-old tetralogy. They feel that if they are repaired early, they become normal. And I said, wow, so beautifully he was putting a tiny patch there. And that's how in the West, they don't have. Once they are diagnosed in the fetal echo, then they correct it in the postpartum, and then afterwards they do only the post repair. But in our country, they continue to live with that. They get
and we have fetal echo is not a very routine thing. That is another thing. Miss high risk pregnancy, we don't go for fetal echo. So we are missing there. We are missing in infancy. We are missing in childhood, and we are struggling in the adult.
In Karnataka. Yeah. So most of the obstetricians, when I presented the data in their obstetrics conference, now they are all very careful. So we have to sensitize the people.
Yeah. Now, like things are changing, but still a lot has to be done into that. I have few questions, ma'am. A lot of my friends have sent. I conveyed them electively. Please send the questions. So some related to clinical scenarios. They ask, these are the students, MD medicine students, the reason to miss or underestimate the cyanosis. What are the fallacies with the pulse oximeter? So these are the questions from the MD students.
Okay, pulse oximetry, one thing you must remember, it is part of the clinical examination. You have to carry the pulse oximetry as the students as well as the clinicians. Because in the past, when we were students, we used to make the child or the person go up and down and exercise to look for the appearance of the cyanosis. But now we have to. And whether to put it on the thumb or the index finger or a middle finger is the fallacy. And here the variation can be there. So they prefer to put it on the middle finger rather than the other fingers or the toes. And whenever you are doing the pulse oximetry, remember to do it both in the upper limb and the lower limb,
Yes.
so that you don't miss the differential cyanosis and also the reverse cyanosis also. And especially in the children, you will miss. And in adult, where there is a very minimal cyanosis, you are likely to miss it. The conjunctiva may be red, but if he's an alcoholic, you never know whether it is due to alcohol or due to the cyanosis. So oximetry is very important. More than the fallacy, I think the oximetry must be a good one and should be put properly in the middle finger, and both all the four fingers you have to see. Because if there is a PDA with the cooptation and if the left subclavian is arising distal to that, then the two upper limbs will have a different cycle.
Yes, yes.
And that's how, we have to do in all the four limbs. And oximetry, it has to be carried compulsorily, like the pulse, the BP, and the JVP. Pulse oximetry must be part and parcel of the examination.
And the nail polish should be removed.
Ah,
Mehendi is another problem. Actually, they put dark mehendi and you can't get saturation and you can't remove that. So that is a very difficult situation to checking the oxygen saturation by pulse oximetry.
I know, Munesh, especially when they're cyanotic, they want to hide it by putting the polish, and that to all sorts of colors and 2-3 layers, and it is really difficult. Agreed.
And in low cardiac output, obviously, because perfusion is poor, we may underestimate the things. With severe anemia, we can miss cyanosis. That is the important message for the medicine.
Okay.
What is the acceptable hemoglobin for cyanotic heart disease patient? Ideally, we should treat on time, but we are seeing these unfortunate patients. So acceptable level of cyanosis for them. And what is the role of iron supplementation?
What's the role of?
Iron supplementation, prophylactic.
Okay. Maybe you can answer that. Here we maintain around 14 to 16. Any hemoglobin going between 18, 23, they are like emergency. And if it is even 10 or 12, it is like anemia.
Yes.
And that's how it has to be very important. So you can answer the next question.
And iron supplementation, obviously, because they need high erythropoiesis is more, so they need more nutrition in form of iron and the folic acid. We need to give a normal maintenance. No, we don't need in therapeutic dose, but a maintenance.
Especially when they're pregnant.
Yes, yes.
Anemia becomes more prominent there.
Yeah. Then the role of beta blocker means what to check before that, and like how to follow with beta blocker. And few prescription actually I see in adult patient, the adult cardiologist is following them so ecosprin. Okay. All adult patient, even congenital cyanotic, they are getting ecosprin very frequently. It is not uncommon thing to see ecosprin for those patients. So there should be a message for adult patient, adult cardiologist or the physician, what to do with those.
Manish, that's a very important one. Once you have put the patient on Indirol, and you are not going to give lifelong. Once you have made the diagnosis and the child is come to the weight which can be operated, go ahead and do the surgery rather than continuing the Indirol tablet or the propranolol for the lifelong. That is the one thing. The second thing is, what is the next question?
Ecosprin. Adult patients are most of the time coming with prescription of ecosprin.
I know whenever there is a polycythemia, there is likely to be micro infarcts in the brain. And that is the reason they start putting. So I feel instead of putting the ecosprin and prolonging their thing, because every time there is a micro thrombosis in the brain, there is a multiple lacunar infarcts. And those infarcts, they become like a nidus for the brain abscess. And that's how I showed you the patient who came with the brain abscess and referred to me for the fitness for surgery. So they are forgetting the elephant of the cyanotic and concentrating on the thrombosis. So I think instead of putting aspirin or ecosprin, let them assess the patient and send for the surgical correction, because we have so many options now, either intervention or the palliation or the corrective surgery. All options are there,
and when
so it has to be corrected.
Yeah, and when these unfortunately, some patients are inoperable, like Eisenmenger syndrome, we don't have, and they are cyanotic, they are polycythemic. In that condition, if indicated, anticoagulants are there, because polycythemia will lead to thromboasthenia. Already platelets are sick. They could be high or low in number with these patients. Usually they are thrombocytopenic because of mainly erythropoiesis, poietic series is growing there. But so platelets are already suffering. So it's, if indicated, there is evidence of infarct or intracardiac, because with arrhythmia they can have intracardiac thrombus also. We need to go towards the anticoagulant than the
Manish, I think here, if the patient has got a non-compaction of the LV or the RV or the apex, they are very prone. I showed you one of my patients where there is a non-compaction. They are very prone for thrombus formation and thromboembolism. They have to have aspirin. And if there is a LV dysfunction, RV dysfunction, where again they are prone for the thrombosis, the aspirin can be given.
And air travel in cyanotic patients.
The saturation must be checked. Anything above 85 is okay, but anything like 60, 65, air travel must be avoided. Especially the pulmonary hypertension, that becomes worse.
And like one of my friend, Naveen, she is from Bangladesh. She has sent me 2-3 queries. One is causes of longevity in adult tetralogy other than MEPCAS and PTA.
What are the
adult tetralogy presentation? What are the factors leading to late presentation?
They come with the aortic regurgitation, and they come with the angina cerulus. Angina cerulus is an extremely rare chest pain. This is caused because of the hypertrophy of the right ventricle. In a cyanotic patient, getting chest pain, not because of the coronary artery disease, but because of the hypertrophy of the right ventricle, and that is called as angina cerulus. So if a cyanotic patient comes with a chest pain, look for the ECG for the changes and the RV side also. And then they can come with the bacterial endocarditis and present with that. And there can be restrictive VST, as I showed in one of the cases, where there was a suprasystemic RV pressure, JVP rate came with the failure.
Yeah, very sick subset actually that is.
And then anemia is very common, whether it is in Bangladesh or in India, especially pregnant ladies. If there is an anemia, they can come with the failure. So these are the adult presentations, and they can come with the hemoptysis, as she told about the collaterals.
And another question she asked about the role of speckle tracking in assessment of right heart.
The role of speckled tracking is only to see the right to left shunt or left to right shunt, predominantly where the shunt is going, literally RBCs. See, what happens is we say bidirectional shunt, balance shunt, or right to left shunt, left to right shunt, with the visual listing. There is no way of evaluating it. So this is a little assistance to us to make out what sort of shunt it is.
Her another case scenario is a pregnant lady with Epstein anomaly who was acyanotic previously with 98% saturation, came to emergency with atrial flutter and saturation of 85-90%. So how to manage?
Arrhythmia has to be managed, and
second trimester of pregnancy.
Second trimester, and Ablation also can be tried. I think the electrophysiologist would be able to do the cart and then assess whether it is a life-threatening. Because WPW syndrome, there is a wide QRS complex, though the tachycardia is there, it is not very severe. Unlike I told you, the ventriculotomy in the post-tricuspid, where it is a VT, VF. But here it is a more of the atrial arrhythmia, and because of the WPW syndrome, the wide QRS complex will be there. So I think the electrophysiologist's opinion must be taken before she is treated properly. Because many of the drugs are contraindicated, including amiodarone during the pregnancy, and hence don't blindly put the drugs which can harm the fetus.
Fetus, yeah. So medical management first. If not, we can go for the RF ablation. She's in second trimester. That is more of the safest zone. And drug obviously has to be chosen according to fetal safety. This is very important. And after delivery is also very important. Fetal echo is important, and assessment of mother and baby after birth is important. So it is more, it goes into two individuals than with single individual in pregnant lady.
For taking interest and from Bangladesh joining us and then asking such very important.
She has joined with her all students, so she was very curious. Okay, tell me, send me the link. Another is a query came from one of the DM students is Eisenmenger syndrome. So one is the basic precaution what we advise, and second is the on echo. What basic thing means for the risk categorization, because sudden death is there. So what basic things they should look on echocardiography for these patients?
First, you must find out the saturation. The second, on the X-ray, look for the peripheral pruning. And the peripheral pruning gives you an idea whether it is in the stage 5 or the 6 of Edwards classification. And then look for the pulmonary artery engorgement and the PFO, whether there is a right to left shunt or there is a large VST or an AST or the PDA. And then after that, depending on the thing, either 1 or 2 drugs can be put. Either the sildenafil along with the bosentan, the combination can be put. And if this is not adequate, then in those patients, suppose the ductus arteriosus is there and then enough blood is not going to the left side, then we can open the foramen ovale, widen it. And I have seen Shiva putting a device there with the holes in the AST device for the right to left shunt. So the
flow regulator.
The right to left, yeah. Like how in the VST, the surgeons do the flap surgery, in the same way, we interventionalists can put that sort of thing. So this is in stages, you have to manage. To avoid the syncope and the sudden death, this is the last resort. But until then, the drugs have to be maintained, restrict the, activities, and then no traveling to the high altitude. And those are the precautions must be explained to the patient, and not to get married. And if they get married,
no pregnancy. If because sometimes they are I want to have a baby and they come with pregnancy. Okay, then obviously termination is again very high risk thing. Continuing is very high risk. Then we need to choose the pulmonary vasodilator. So the bosentan group as teratogenic, so we need to go on sildenafil. That way we have to choose, and obviously they need a very careful watch in hospital with PH group and the congenital heart disease group. Very, very difficult patients.
And now the obstetricians are also advanced. Then with the drugs itself, they can do the miscarriage, the medical termination of pregnancy. They are capable of doing it in a safer way. So here, when the question of life of mother and the child is there, we have to give importance to the mother.
Then on echo, obviously for the risk categorization, if TR is significant, if there is pericardial effusion, if there is ventricular dysfunction, if there is thrombus, if there are arrhythmias, obviously they are the high risk for the any thing going to be happen. Another question I had was stop physiology with conduit repair, means Rest-Tilly group.
Stop
So,
physiology
with Rest-Tilly group, conduit repair.
Rest-Tilly,
So
okay.
TGA, Malpos great vessels, or pulmonary atresia, that group. So what should be the follow-up plan? Because it is difficult to define the conduit. In small babies, it is done, but in adult patients, it's so difficult to define the conduit. So how to go? One is an echo, one extra modality we should use on particular regular basis for these patients.
And I think you can take this question and answer until I drink water.
So, like, as I said, defining the conduit, because it is a very anterior structure, it is just behind the sternum. It is difficult in adult and grown-up patients. So one is clinically, auscultation, murmur, ECG you need to see, chest X-ray you need to see, on echo right side of the heart is important, in addition to other residual issues. RE pressure is important. If RE pressure is high, you need to obviously look carefully for the conduit, and needed, you may go for the cardiac catheter in some patients, CT angiography or cardiac MRI. You need to have one extra modality once in at least 2 years in adult patient we require to follow up these patients, because conduit restenosis in pediatric age is very high because they are getting smaller. In adult, it's not that fast, but a watch is very important for these patients. And another important point here is the aortic root. In all cyanotic heart diseases, they are operated, there is aortoarthropathy. So aorta should be looked in all cyanotic heart disease patients, even with TGA. TGA can present, TGA in later life, post-arterial suisse, they present with aortic root dilatation. They can present with peripheral PS. TOF is quite common, with GRB quite common, with Rest-Tilly things quite common. So very important emphasis should be given. If needed, they behave like Marfan syndrome with aorta point of view. They should be started on ARBs or beta blocker, like that. We need to go on that line for these patients. Important watch is needed for these patients. And one question about advice. This was again from same friend. And any advice on knowing the coronaries before RVOT stenting?
The RVOT stenting, you don't have to bother about coronary. Coronaries are the epicardial structures. You are stenting intracardiac. But when you are doing the surgery, the infundibulectomy, the surgeon cuts the RV, right ventricle, and at that time, inadvertently, he'll cut the coronary artery. So for the stenting, it is not important. But on the contrary, in the adult pulmonary stenosis, while doing dilatation, like I told you, the triology of Fallot, if you oversize the balloon, and it can compress the coronary artery between the aorta and the pulmonary artery. And I have seen the adult cardiologist, while doing the balloon dilatation, the patient has arrested on the cath table. Yeah. So this is very important for the balloon dilatation in the adult. And in the children, we don't find that difficulty because nowadays we don't oversize at all. But the adult cardiologists tend to oversize. They think doing the balloon dilatation in pulmonary stenosis is very easy. And then
yes. Actually, I have seen them doing cardiac massage for valvular PS. It is so scary. Like suddenly you are switching off the cardiac output. So you need to be prepared for everything. Your inflation should be, its time is very crucial to inflation and deflation.
Yeah, in pediatrics, we take 100%, where they take 120%. And that's how they get into trouble. So whether it is in the aortic or the pulmonary, I prefer to take exactly the size of the annulus.
Another, like when adult,
no problem.
Because adult stenting, RVO, not in the pediatric, but the adult group, around 5 to 6% chances are there, same physiology. It can get compressed between the your aorta. So balloon occlusion of RVOT, simultaneous coronary angiogram to check, to rule out the compression when you are going to put the stent in these patients.
Well taken. The point is well taken.
Role of cardiac MRI, when they should go for the MRI, because adult physicians are mainly following these patients. So when they should think about getting an MRI done in post-op.
I already gave the examples where there is a pulmonary atresia You do not know what type of pulmonary atresia, what type of collaterals are there, and the surgeon has to do the unifocalization. You have to know which is the native thing, which is the collateral. To differentiate that, you have to go for the CT and MRI. That is the first visit.
Post-op follow-up, top follow-up like.
Yeah. And the second one is like I showed you, it was a double chambered RV and it was giving an impression like the Swiss cheese VST. And when there is a Swiss cheese VST, if I do the balloon dilatation, the child will be converted into double chambered RV into PS into VST PH. So there you should not do more harm. And in that case, you have to go for the MRI or the CT or the 4D echo to rule out the Swiss cheese VST so that your pulmonary dilatation of the pulmonary stenosis is safe and is useful to the patient. So this is how, whenever we are not able to delineate the anatomy, especially the pulmonary vascular anatomy, the intracardiac, we can get very good picture on the echo, 3D, 4D, everything. But extracardiac, it becomes very difficult, and that time we have to go for the CT or MRI.
And on follow for pulmonary registration for RV side of heart, MRI is the gold standard.
Catheter, valve replacement or surgical, at that time you can do.
Yes. Just because ma'am you showed just to tell our viewers about the contrast echo, because you showed two slides of the one as right SVC and the left SVC to the left side of the heart. So role of contrast echo they should know.
In fact, the contrast echo, I use it whenever there is a divided right atrium, what we call as the cor triatrium dexter. I had one patient to whom they had diagnosed it with the CT as the pulmonary hypertension, primary pulmonary hypertension. But when she came in the gasping state, when I did, I saw there was a membrane in the RA and the clots in the roof of the RA. And I thought these clots must have embolized and caused the pulmonary embolism. There, in contrast, what you do is take the patient's autologous blood, half ml, and churn it with the saline. Don't take the air. See, many people, they take the air and churn it and inject the bubbles. Don't do that.
Blood form very good contrast.
No, even when you take the patient's blood with the saline and mix it, you get very fine, beautiful bubbles. And I have the pictures and excellent picture you get. So whenever there is a cryptogenic stroke, you want to look at the PFO, then you have to inject from the lower limb, not the upper limb. Many people inject the contrast from the upper limb. Don't do that. Have an access in the lower limb and inject from the lower limb, because if you see the fetal circulation from the IVC, the eustachian valve diverts the blood towards the PFO, foramen ovale, and hence when you inject from below and with the Valsalva maneuver, it will go. So another condition is the patient has got cyanosis, there is no murmur, cardia is normal, and in that case, you have to do the contrast echo to rule out the pulmonary AV fistulas. So pulmonary AV fistulas, you do not get the contrast immediately to the left side, like in the PDA or in the AST. In AST, immediately you get to the left atrium. But here, after 3 to 4 cycles, you get the bubbles coming from the pulmonary veins entering into the LA and LV. So that is one important place where the contrast is done. So except these 3 conditions, the contrast is not required. So here, the cor triatrium dexter, that is the divided right atrium, and then the pulmonary AV fistula, and also in cases where the cryptogenic stroke is there, whether in young adults or children, the PFO has to be done with the Valsalva maneuver.
And that is very important message, doing contrast from lower extremity, because If you do from upper extremity, you won't see right to left shunt. And you will just say that nothing is there.
Then they say it is normal. See, because PFO is like a
yeah, that flap,
it is like a flap. Unless you increase the RA pressure and then open the flap, the bubbles will not go.
Yes.
And they have the way of going. So the nature and the God's creation is so wonderful.
We have to follow the course of nature.
We have to follow that. Correct.
So, ma'am, it is wonderful having a discussion with you. So, I think we should conclude. Now, time is getting over. And thank you, Indian Academy of Echocardiography, Dr. Parashar, everyone, Dr. Rahul, for giving the opportunity to discuss such an important topic and get enlightened by ma'am. And thank you.
And it's my pleasure, Manish. You are so casual and so good. And you are not only academically good, you are a good orator too. And it's my pleasure to be with the Indian Academy of Echocardiography, especially Dr. Parashar and the secretary and everyone. I thank wholeheartedly, because most of the adults, they neglect the congenital heart diseases. So this is a very important one, because unless we make an effort, we will miss the diagnosis. And if we miss the diagnosis, we'll miss the whole thing. So we don't want any more Madhubalas, any more thing. We want to save as many lives as possible, and nobody should go for Eisenmenger's. And God bless all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Namaskar.